Welcome back. As you can see, I have company today. We're in a very affectionate mood, and I thought we ought to go back to our disaster preparedness airport plan. And today we are at R for review. And this is the next to last phase in our plan, penultimate. That was one of our words of the day. And the plan began airport, A, assessment, I, inventory, R, resources, P, planning, O, organization, and now we are at R for review. And as I've mentioned before, because of our current pandemic, this new review phase has been a real eye-opener for me. I imagine it's been an eye-opener for a lot of you too. So we'll get into it when we come back. So we are reviewing our plans. And as I have mentioned, I previously went with what was always considered the conventional wisdom for disaster preparedness, that you should be prepared for somewhere between a few days and a few weeks. A few weeks being ideal, but at least a few days. I certainly had no idea that we would be looking at, I believe we are looking at least 2 months now, possibly even longer. But I also have to say that when I considered the situations for which we were preparing, I had not considered a worldwide pandemic. I don't think any of us did. So on the one hand, this is a pretty dreadful time for a lot of us. And we are looking at economic hard times in the future because much of our country has been shut down for more than a month. So when we start to consider that, we need to review carefully. So my review has told me that my 2-week planning was nowhere near adequate. Now, we've been lucky. We have our resources in terms of the infrastructure. We have water, we have electricity, we have heat. The grocery stores are open, the shelves are bare, but not bare of everything, but certainly bare of a lot of things. And apparently this is regional too. Around here, no iced tea. No idea why. Bottled water, toilet paper, napkins, Kleenex, anything you can use as a toilet paper substitute. Long gone. Those are off the shelves. They've been off the shelves. Hand sanitizers, a lot of cleaning supplies. Some things that you just wouldn't expect, like bleach, for example. I would have thought bleach would have been one of the last things to go, but bleach is getting hard to come by. So when I look at my own review, do you have an itch? When I look at my own review, I'm thinking, well, for one thing, I need to prepare more in terms of keeping essentials. I absolutely need to go off and get a very large package of toilet paper and stick it under my bed. I also need to look at, even if I'm not prepared to stockpile 2 or 3 months worth of food or bottled water or whatever, I definitely need to look in terms of more than the 2 weeks I was originally planning on. And in fact, I did have 2 weeks worth of food here. I almost always have at least enough food to last me 2 weeks. I am by myself now. There was a time when, I was in larger households and that sort of became a way of life. But for most of us, what the review process is going to tell us is that planning for things like natural disasters, flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, and as I said, California forest fires, landslides, is probably not sufficient. If I had considered the matter prior to the pandemic and said, well, let me throw in military attack by a foreign power. Now, we are in the United States, and that just seems remarkably unlikely to us, but there are people in other parts of the world who deal with that threat on a daily basis. Would that have encouraged me to keep more food on hand? Absolutely. So, even though this is not a great time for a lot of purposes, this is a really good time to review our plan because we are in the middle of it right now. We know what we're not able to get. We know what we are doing without, and we can use that to build on. So, one of my first changes that I've made in terms of the review is I pulled out a box that has been under my bed, and let me show you a picture of the box so you can see. Here we go. This box is designed to store Christmas ornaments. That's pretty obvious from the fact that the lid is red and green and it's got little wheels and it's not very deep. It's a shallow box and will roll under the bed. I've pulled that out and I've started stocking food in it, as you can see from the pictures. The amount of food I have stocked in there that's certainly not by any means a complete, okay, go, Tail. It's not by any means a complete selection of food, but again, I am not doing this in order to just go out and suddenly buy everything I need all at once. This is a process. This is a long-term plan. It will take a while. So I have things like little jars of fruit cocktail and a little can of beans and so on. And the things that I put into that little box that goes under my bed are the things that I purchased when we were talking about organizing. So they were my demonstration items, things that I went out to the store and got specifically to say, well, this is how I'm going to start. Over time, there will be a great many more things that will go in there. A lot of it will be canned goods, things like tuna fish. I will probably get some sort of long-term storage milk, and we've talked about that too. Parmalat, which is shelf-stable. And so it doesn't have to go into the refrigerator. It can go right into the cabinet. A few other things that are going to go in there and fluff things out. Now, I keep saying this, and I do mean it. Eat what you store what you eat. It's very tempting to go out and buy foods that store well merely because they store well. But the problem with that is if you and your family are not accustomed to eating those foods, switching your diet suddenly is not only going to create a sense of hardship, but it can create a lot of other problems that you really don't want to be facing. not the least of which is, consider what happens to your digestion and your need for the bathroom if you suddenly make great changes in your diet. And do you really want to be going through something like that in a time of stress and crisis? I would say no. So as I start to fill up my little Christmas ornament box, I am going to be looking to things that I like to have available to eat. These are not things I eat every day. It's by no means something that I would say, oh yeah, I can live on that. But I do eat tuna fish. So tuna fish is going in there. There are a few things that are in there that I simply put in there because I thought, well, this will be a good time to try some of these products. As I put this together, my hope is that I'm going to have a long time before the next shelter-in-place event. So I'm going to be able to take those foods out, try them, see if I like them. If I don't, replace them with something else. So that's what this review process has done for me. It's also shown me that one of the things that I had considered very reliable was transportation. Suddenly, when there are state orders for people to shelter in place, public transportation is coming under fire. That's not something, if you're ordered to shelter in place, there's a good chance that you're not going to be able to go down to the corner bus stop and catch a bus. And that's an impact. So I need to factor that into my review. My review, as I said, has always been based on the idea that if I had to evacuate, transportation would be available as long as I were evacuating early enough in the disaster. If you wait too long, transportation does become an issue. So right now, what I'm doing and what I am suggesting that you do as well is look at your plan, examine it carefully, and see if it's working for you. Because, as I say, there are things in my plan that were absolutely not working for me. Yes, I am very glad that I had a good 2-3 weeks worth of extra food in the cabinets. I would be a lot more comfortable if I had a little more than just 2 or 3 weeks of extra food. I'm also looking at the fact that one of the unanticipated factors, impacts, if you will, of this situation is I don't like to be forced to stay at home. I don't care for that. I'm very much accustomed to being able to go out, do things, do pretty much what I want to do, and I'm not able to do that now. My goodness, you can't even walk into the front door of a store anymore. They're funneling traffic around to side doors, and you have to wait in line, and somebody tells you when you can enter the store. Most of that, of course, is absurdly excessive. It's entirely unnecessary. On the worst days, the stores are not crowded, and you really don't need someone saying, you can go to this cashier, you can go to that cashier. It's all about this social distancing thing. I am also unaccustomed to being told that I can't leave my house without a face covering. So those are things that are hard for me to adjust to. As I look at the review process, one of the things that I am discovering is that sheltering in place is not as difficult as I thought it would be. Now, the biggest factor for that is that we still have our communications. We have our infrastructure. We have electricity. We have heat. We have water. It's the society is still out there. We just have governments telling us that we can no longer participate in society the way we want to, the way we did a month ago. Now we're all being told to run and hide. Running and hiding is not my thing. So that part is easier. I still have access to the internet. I'm not a television person, so I don't even have a television. But boy, you take away my internet and I'm lost. So I do have that as a method of staying in touch. I can find what's going on in the world online. I don't need a television telling me. So when we start to look at the impacts, we need to look at how it impacts us as individuals. And for me, other than irritation, and that's my big factor right now, irritation, other than irritation, I'm doing fairly well. I expect a lot of people are doing better. I expect a lot of people are doing worse. I would have to say overall, I'd probably consider myself somewhere in the middle of the pack. I don't have emotional or mental health issues that make it hard for me to be alone at a time of stress. A lot of people do. On the other hand, I don't have a large family in my home, so I don't have those relationships to support me in isolation. And I need to add that into my review and consider how I want to deal with that. In fact, can it be dealt with? I'm not sure it can, because that's the other thing that the review process will tell us. It tells us how effectively our plan is working in the disaster, but it's also telling us the things that are out of our control. In a disaster, a lot of things are going to be outside of your control. If you are accustomed to having everything in your control, and apparently I am, because that is annoying me that I don't, then your ability to weather the storm is going to be a bit more difficult. So right now, as I review, I'm looking at the fact that my evacuation plan needs a backup. I cannot rely on public transportation. Always thought I could. I can't. So I need to work out a backup, and this is good to know. I also need to be aware of the fact that my previous notions about shelter in place, and this is all psychological, that's all there is to it. I was accustomed to thinking 2-3 weeks things go back to normal. I really need to look at changing my psychological picture of this and adjusting to the fact that things can happen that are not going to be 2 or 3 weeks and then back to normal. So I'm sure you all have other things that will come out in your reviews. In terms of the tangible, physical things that I can deal with, I need to get more toilet paper. I need to make sure I have more food on hand and that I have done a better job. And this better job was back in the inventory and resources phase of finding places to store that food. I suppose for the moment I will be content to store it in a Christmas ornament box under the bed, but I'm probably going to want to make some better long-term plans. I'm probably going to want to start cleaning out sections of closets or kitchen cabinets. I don't know about you, but for me, even though I don't have a very large kitchen, I really have a lot of wasted space in my cabinets. I actually just use perhaps 50% of the space I have available, and the remaining 50% is full of things like a crock pot that I take out once every 3 months, or, the giant boiling pot, for the clam chowder, or for water bath jar sealing. So I need to look at whether or not those items would be better off stored elsewhere so that I could use the freed up space to store the excess food. So the review has been valuable for me. So as you go through your review process, pay attention to everything you're going through now. And as you are going through this, just, what's working for me, what isn't. And remember, we can use this pandemic as a review process. It is a review process. It is a chance to review, and as we go through the next step, which is testing, and that is our final step, we're already there. We are already doing a great deal of testing. We need to do more, and we'll get into that when we speak about the final phase of our plan. But right now, terrible as this is, it's giving us a priceless opportunity, because ordinarily we would have to imagine ourselves in a situation like this. And when you start imagining yourself in situations like this, it hardly ever matches up to the reality. We're lucky. We've got the reality. So remember, the glass is not half empty. It's half full. All right. I'm going to go get word origins, and I'll be right back. Word origins and their romantic stories. Today I thought we would take a quick look at war words. War words and their histories. Buccaneers. From a grill for cooking. Those who take Caribbean cruises down through the West Indies are sailing the waters that used to be marauded by the old buccaneers. When the French invaded these islands in the 17th and 18th centuries, they copied the habits of the Carib Indians and smoked their wild ox flesh over a wooden rack or frame, which the natives called a boucan. Since most of these Frenchmen were pirates, they were called buccaneers, or our buccaneers, although that name earlier meant those who smoke meat over a grill. Interesting. Bugle, the horn of the buffalo. We start back in Roman times with the word bos, B-O-S, ox, one whose diminutive was bucculus, young steer. Note in passing that bucculus is allied to our word bucolic, which means rustic, or out where the steers live. The Latin word bucculus almost became unrecognizable in Old French as bugle, their name for buffalo. And since the bugles we toot today were then made from the horns of the wild ox, the word buglehorn, ox horn, was invented. Finally, we left off the horn and compromised on bugle for the name. And that was another one I didn't know. Cadet, a caddy and a cad. This simple word starts us back over a rather curious and complicated history. We begin in Roman times with the Latin word caput, caput, that meant a human head. Later in Latin, this had the diminutive capitellum, little head, which moved into the Provençal language as capdet, meaning chief, and into French as cadet. By this time, cadet meant a younger son or an officer, for in those days, upper-class sons were usually in the army and, we can suppose, were the coming heads of their families. From France, cadet traveled over the Channel and up to Scotland with the spelling intact and still with the military sense. Then the word began to change, as words often do, and cadet came to mean an errand boy or messenger who hung around waiting for odd jobs, and before we know it, by a change in spelling, the word cadet turned into caddy, the boy who now hangs around the golf clubs waiting to carry our bags. In England, the word cadet followed a similar downward trend and soon was the name of the hanger-on around an English college who assisted students in sports. Hence, in Oxford, a cadet ranked as a townsman and was held in contempt. Soon the students were calling him a cad for short. That is, a low person without gentlemanly habits who violates the codes of decent behavior. And then to show how a once respectable word can end up in the gutter, the cadet we started out with can now mean, in American slang, a pimp who lives on the earnings of a prostitute. Really, I didn't know that at all. So we have the cadet in West Point who preserves the original meaning and dignity of the word, the caddy who carries our golf clubs, and the cad who is always with us, all etymological blood brothers. All right. So as you can see, the photobomb kitty has left me. He's not much of a reader. I hope you all have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.